after the vulnerability was published, so it doesn't take any bad guys very long to catch up with weak points in a system. This is one estimate of IoT devices, 22 billion by Cisco. In fact, Gartner have produced other estimates and they're moving on all the time. And it's recognised that cybersecurity is central to interdisciplinary engineering, or interdisciplinary engineering is sensible cybersecurity equally. So now I'm going to talk for a few minutes about PETRAS, which stands for Privacy, Ethics, Trust, Reliability, Acceptability and Security for the Internet of Things. And this arose from a government initiative, which I will explain to you shortly, and which I'm honoured to be the leader of a principal investigator on behalf of 9 universities. So what do we mean by the Internet of Things in our context? Well, it's very broad, but it's linked also to big data and data analytics in the cloud. Obviously, smart technologies make previously unintelligent things able to communicate, and we think of Nest thermostats, building management systems, and so on. The replacement of wired sensors, particularly in building control systems, with wireless sensors. And of course, in machine-to-machine communication, there are no humans in the loop, so there's no way of really validating whether the right things are actually being transmitted from A to B. I'm beginning to feedback here, so I'm getting too much. So the Gartner estimate, 25 billion by 2020. You know, it's going to be a very great many devices, and I think already the rate of growth is higher. And the possibility of hacking into IoT networks by humans or machine agents brings new cyber threats, new crimes, new security. So I've consulted for the Home Office in the UK, looking at just the crime side, and I've also been working with our security agencies on the national security side as well. So here are some of the examples. I won't read them all out, but I guess some of the more alarming ones might be the middle bullet. So industrial and utilities control, where you've got actuators in the loop, not just sensors. The possibility of spoofing a control signal and causing, for example, the chiller in a computer room to shut down. Actually, you know, typically those systems are not very secure, but actually within half an hour you've taken the business offline potentially. You've got medical devices, you know, ranging all the way from sort of Fitbits at one end, which may not be so important right away, to sort of insulin infusion pumps, which are life critical. There's a whole grayscale where the cost benefit of the type of intervention you need to make needs to be considered. Just interestingly, in the UK, and I guess almost certainly in North America, you've got Fitbits now being linked to health insurance companies, so your personal data modulates your policy cost. That's happening in the UK. A company called Vitality is doing that. And of course, the whole thing is very, very broad indeed. So in buildings, which in my recent history, although I was trained as an electronics and control engineer and worked as a general engineer after my specialism, in the last sort of 10 years of my life, I've done a lot of work around building systems, so I was quite interested in this picture from Intel on the applications of IoT in buildings, and so it's not surprising to see all those things there, particularly down here where you can see the sensors and actuators that are connected in this picture by Zigbee, or it could be some other sort of network, where potential interventions, hacking in, could perturb control signals, or you could actually then, by hacking in at other levels, be looking at, say, the occupancy of a house. So this might be criminal activity, looking to see whether a person is in or not, which might be as a result of reading, say, a smart thermostat, which has occupancy detection. So cybersecurity of IoT is vital. So you've got everything from information theft, personal data eavesdropping, occupancy I mentioned, space and time patterns associated with that, perturbing operation, e.g. denial of a physical service. I mean, that could be vertical transport, it could be a chiller, it could be access control, spoofing of sensor data, maybe to steal energy, falsification of information. And the last one I think is particularly chilling, where you might think of pharmaceuticals that are verified by electronic means, or aerospace parts, which could be potentially counterfeit. So going back to what drove this in the UK, there's a thing called the Blackett Review, which was started quite a few years ago by one of the early chief scientific advisors. And these are reviews of a particular technology which have importance to national security and to, say, the economy. And in this instance, it was felt by the President, Government Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Mark Walper, that it was worth looking at the Internet of Things and getting the entire community around that, including business, government, security services, to really look to see how we could make the IoT as safe as possible, recognising the economic value that should come out of it. And so the Blackett Review, of which I took part in the buildings piece, so I authored with a technical expert from government, the piece on buildings, which led to some research needs that were focused, but that we also looked at transport, healthcare, energy and agriculture. And that, as a result, produced an agenda, a research agenda, the need for focused research and demonstration, and the formation of a body called IoT UK, with a certain amount of money that came from central government and which was given to our communications and media agency, DCMS. DCMS don't typically manage research monies, but they formed a group of projects which I've depicted here. So I've played my own particular project quite loudly, so that's the bigger picture in the middle, the Petras hub. But around it are a city demonstrator, the £10 million demonstrator in Manchester, City Verb, which is being run by Cisco. There's also a healthcare node looking at projects on ageing demography, and there's another topic as well with Surrey and Bristol University, so there's another 10 million over there. There's an SBRI call, which is like SBIR or DARPA strategic procurement initiative as well for SMEs. And then the hub that I'm running, which is we've called Petras, which comprises hub universities, so Imperial College, Lancaster University, Oxford, UCL, Warwick. And then for specialists, each of those universities is dealing with a social and technical element. I should have said that earlier on, that IoT cybersecurity is seen to be a confluence, if you like, between social and technical challenges. And then we've got some specialist universities working with us as well, so Cardiff on international internet connected IoT, Edinburgh on design, the effective design on security, Southampton on, and of course Southampton was where Berners-Lee came from, so actually that original group looking at IoT data observatories, and Surrey working on 5G mobile comms. And we've, in this slide, 50 public and private sector research partners. In fact, it's now over 100, as this picture shows. So we've got those 9 leading universities. We've got an Alan Turing Institute in the UK, recently formed, and we've got 4/5 of the academic partners actually involved in that. The combined hub value is £24 million. We've got 2 more years to work to spend that. 19 projects now, plus another 15 after a further funding call. We've got 3 of the Blackett Review experts actually as academics in our partnership, and 47 partners plus a further 40 that have come in since we started. We've got presence in the UK, Central Europe, America, all active, and in fact we should add Japan as well. We've got a very active IoT community, as you'd probably be aware. But a strong interest in inter and multidisciplinary focus, and I guess that's sort of one of those bridge points into the IET's interest, creating those communities whereby you need, if you like, special language for social scientists to speak to physical scientists to make sense of how each other work, etc. The breakdown of the work, so we were basically focused on 5 challenge streams, the generic outcomes of this work over 30 projects: privacy and trust, safety and security, harnessing economic value, standards, governance and policy, and adoption and acceptability. So if you just take those, they're so generic, it's like boiling the sea. It would be very hard to configure projects around those. So what we did was to take a matrix view, if you like, around the topics you can see in the middle there, which are broadly sectoral. We've called them constellations. And for each of those, we have some samples of projects in those areas. So we've got 30 projects, each of them funded around about £500,000, that's some more, some a little bit more there, so 1 to 1.5 postdoctoral research associate years in scale. And you can see some of the partners around the outside there, so people ranging in size from the BBC, for example, British Telecom, Cisco in a big way, Telefonica, which runs our large mobile phone network in the UK, O2, right the way through to very small companies, SMEs, and non-government organisations as well. And the Home Office, so we've actually got mainstream support from government departments as well. So the aims were to deliver co-produced and cross-sectoral outputs that actually cross over technical and socio-economic benefits. We clearly wanted to put the UK in front of it as a world leader in expertise and deployment of trusted IoT technology, actually create an enduring cross-disciplinary environment which could continue with the partnerships between universities and the industrial partners and government partners via consortia of interest, create a social platform for innovation and provide that enduring legacy. So beyond our funding period, can we be self-supporting? It was a big challenge. But with more than half of our funding actually already outside government donation, I think there's a possibility of that. So we wanted to be integrated in our approach, collaborative social and physical science, remove barriers to the beneficial adoption of IoT, address those generic knowledge gaps. So we did some initial work. We are publishing very shortly state-of-the-art and knowledge gap analysis of IoT CyberSecurity, which will be coming out through the Royal Academy of Engineering, we hope. Using innovative technologies, including in the wild. What do we mean by that? Well, an example was in the Olympic Park out in East London. One of our collaborators has got IoT-enabled voice recognition gnomes, which are put in little figurines people can talk to, and the idea is to see how people react to things that are deployed in a natural environment. You know, are they actually going to use those things? These are actually to provide spatial information when you're visiting the park, you know, what to see, etc. And engaging users. So we've held a number of large, we call them user research workshops, each of them with over 100 attendees from major collaborators. So I wanted to give, I feel I'm preaching to the converted here, so I'll give you just a few examples of threats. And these were some of the ones that I identified for the Home Office. I've got some examples I was going to give today on these. And the first one I think is particularly salutary because it's such a basic thing. So building management systems. Every building, as you know, has got its own control system. It's a bit like an industrial control system, but it looks at the temperature, humidity, etc., air movement, and it synthesizes control signals that make the environment comfortable. IBM, a few years ago, I think it was about a year ago, implemented an ethical hacking test with their penetration team, and they went to a particular building and challenged the team to actually try and hack into the system. So they went in via the building management system, but the building management system was actually connected to the enterprise IT by the installer. So the installer, although the spec may have said, you know, keep them separate, air-gapped, it's actually quite convenient to be able to sit down at a workstation in the company and just tune up the BMS. So this guy left that connected. So simple password, I believe the password was password, as so often is, through the BMS, through the back door, and then into the enterprise system, and data was then demonstrated it could be stolen. There's a reference at the bottom there for those who are interested. I'm sure these slides can be shared. Another area that our National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children and the obviously enforcement agencies are interested in is the insidious potential for using smart toys as a way of peeking on children, geolocating them, etc. And again, there was a Barbie type incident, I think, here, which is recorded in that bottom link, of where a doll could be misused in that way. Of course, acoustic and video channels potentially could be hacked into that way. And many of you will be aware of the baby monitor scandal. That was probably one of the first IoT hacks, I think, out of Russia, where, you know, a tessellated pane of children's bedrooms was published on the internet. I mentioned healthcare devices, so I think here you've got everything from a jawbone through to a pacemaker. I'm sure the pacemaker isn't an IoT device. Typically they're near field programmed anyway, so they're less at risk. But in hospitals where you're beginning to get IoT located critical medical equipment, it's important to try and judge where the risk lies and what type of intervention is really important across the range of applications. And of course, cars now and in the future. I think there was a major US manufacturer whose vehicle was hacked into, I think in a test, and it was demonstrated that through the entertainment system upgrade channel, it was possible to hack into the steering, braking systems, etc., and disable or affect those. Obviously, as we move to autonomous vehicles, which are going to be dependent on both local sensing but also GPS and probably live analytics in the web, we need to be very, very mindful of that. And of course, all the questions, one of the partners in Petras is a major law firm in London, which is very tech savvy. I'm trying to think of the name is, but it'll come to me. So they're very interested in actually liability and positioning themselves with respect to claims associated with accidents that might obtain as a result of autonomous vehicles. having problems, which may or may not be due to being hacked into. So just to give you a view of how things were with the work plan, it's too small to see, but you can kind of recognise the colours down the side there are the so-called constellations and the streams, the top main themes. We're just beyond the core one theme, and we've just put out another £2 million worth of funding announcements to further research, and by the end of next year we'll be converging on some outcomes for government to absorb, and also for our industrial partners as well. So some of the constellation examples that may be just worth looking at are transport and mobility. This is being led out of Warwick University, which has close links with Jaguar Land Rover, the Tata Group, and that's looking at smart street planning, pricing of roads, depending on times of day and congestion, developing solutions for communications among autonomous and semi-autonomous cars, so how do they brigade themselves when they can communicate with each other. Health and care is looking at particularly things like blockchain technologies in very small physical environments. So how do we manage that? We've got very small memory space, processing power, and ambient energy, if you like, or power to support those. And also the way in which people, so looking at the social side, what affects user trust in medical applications of IoT? What sort of thing could cause the public to lose confidence, and how do we mitigate against that? So defining a code of practice really for medics, the people who specifies these things. This is being led out of Imperial College. It's a very technical and sort of ASIC-based approach to looking at the situation. Then there's a whole raft of interesting things around design. So typically engineering is for people, and design influences the way people use engineered products, as we know. But can we use design to affect the way in which people view and respond to cybersecurity challenges? Also, it's possible to look at what's attractive for people in IoT-enabled kit, and one of the things that I quite like is a product called BitBarista, which came out of Edinburgh University, and that's working with a design company and an actual SME. Basically, when you order your coffee from your smartphone, you can specify the source, the ethical source of the coffee, for example, and you can then go for your coffee machine and collect it. Infrastructure is a massive area for IoT, particularly condition monitoring, so looking for preventative maintenance. We're getting increasingly designed-in sensors to bridges, roads, rail, etc. Some of them are dynamic, so we can use citizen sensing, identifying potholes in the road by the accelerometers in the smartphone, for example, right the way through to strain in a bridge if it's having a failure. And Cambridge University have been working very strongly on that. This is an area that I'm looking at personally as a researcher with postdoctoral research associates, and Alliot, which is looking at analytical lenses, if you like, different ways of looking at different types of infrastructure in different places around the world to see how people are responding to that and to advise government. Identification, absolutely critical. How can we be sure that not just people, but things and data streams are what they say they are? So provenance is absolutely critical there. Looking at some robust solutions that are, as much as possible, future-proof, because the whole thing is an arms race, it's moving along all the time. And that's being led out of Oxford University, David Derrura and Professor Luciano Floridi. And supply and control systems. This touches upon the building management challenge we talked about earlier on, but increasingly, or in parallel and with equal emphasis, industrial control as we move towards Industry 4.0, which will be about bespoke products being made at volume at a reasonable cost. Increasingly, the whole thing will be data-driven to a much greater extent than it is now, and open, whereas today data streams around computer-aided manufacturing are relatively closed within organisations. That again is being led out of Warwick University. And I think nearly finally, ambient environment. So this is the Queen Elizabeth Park in East London I mentioned earlier on. So how can people use devices, IoT devices, in the wild, so to speak? Will they trust them? Will they ignore them? And so on. What type of interactions work best for that type of use? So the impact so far, fairly recent slide. So quite pleased with this. So there's a thing called Research Fish, which our funding agency, the UPSRC, which is like NSF in the US, require us to fill in every year. What have we done as a result of year one? Well, there are some of the numbers. I think the engagement activities numbering 131. These are direct engagements with users. New collaborations and partnerships, 64 of them over the year. And we're doing pretty well with publications as well. To run that sort of size of organisation, it's like running a small company and with 100 user partners who are very hungry to engage. I've hired 2 professional managers to just deal with those relationships. So one comes from Cisco, who's actually got domain knowledge and the ability to work with clients, and the other one comes from the automotive industry. And that's been really, very important for us to do that, to make the whole thing work. The types of user partner engagement, we just choose a few there. So Cisco have been particularly interested in funding a number of projects, co-funding research, and have actually designed some new projects with us. The BSI, which is the national standards body in the UK, has been a close partner, obviously very interested in standards that emerge, and here of course the IET is slightly in competition with BSI, but we do work together as well, so I'm being completely open here. DCMS, the Department for Communications, Media and Sport, is the sponsoring department. We've got a secondment there in Whitehall already from one of our research team. There's the law firm, whose name I couldn't remember, Pinsent Masons, very closely engaged in already writing client advisory papers as a result of our research. And then some smaller companies, Wallet Services and Machinery Express Services, where the BitBarista idea came from. The IET is very strongly behind this. I think the IET has felt that there hasn't been really a publication or a set of activities around the social and technical interaction on IoT. There is some good coverage of purely technical. So we're going to have the first international conference in March next year. A new journal is in the late planning stages. And then my other day job, BRE, is very heavily being involved in building management itself and building technologies, and they're working on new projects as well. So there are some links here which I won't leave up particularly long, but there's one on building information modelling, which is the core technology for digitalisation of the built environment in the UK. There's a whole other story around cybersecurity there, which is quite interesting. Digital Built Britain, which was authored for government by UCL colleagues. I wrote the technical chapter on that. That's about the fusion of live digital data with static CAD data, which is, I guess, de facto in many places, but actually there isn't an integrated tool set for that. So that the ultimate goal would be that a building operator could click up on the screen a picture of the building and actually then home in on particular variables and identify when the last maintenance interval was, and the current running temperature and so on and so forth. The interactive PDF advice document from the Home Office is the third one, and the fourth one is the Blackett Review, which I mentioned earlier on, which is a public document. The last one is the web link to the Petras Hub, which you've just been hearing about. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I have an injured leg, and I was at a physiotherapy clinic yesterday. The guy wheeled up a machine called a muscle stim machine, which pulses electricity through the muscles. And he pulled out the phone and started to adjust the machine. And I said, you know, don't put that machine on me. I really don't, right? Because everybody else in this place, I can have connection stuck to my leg, right? So it's an example, right, of the type of things. Right? Questions, please.
I guess this is more for consumer side of IoT. I've seen a shift in security where they're actually properly implementing security in IoT devices. There was a recent article or a publication about a year ago, and there has been many since, where you have these fancy Bluetooth door locks. But Bluetooth as a technology is good because it's within a certain range, so you can guarantee the person is within that range. Yeah. But they just badly implement the security of it, where if they use a one-time PIN or if they don't void old PINs. Are you seeing a shift between having a better, because if you have a company that their whole model is to check out a new product every 6 months, they will not spend that much time in security. Oh, it has like a PIN, but it's 4 zeros. It's good enough.
Absolutely. Or the hardwired password. I mean, that's exactly what you're saying there, isn't it? So I think the commercial economic prerogative, really, when there isn't a deep awareness in the consumer base for the need for security, is that those things will happen unless there is sort of either procurement rules by governmental regulation, which actually UK government is very, very shy of doing regulations, so they would hope it would become an industry best practice. One of the things that alarmed us was that potentially small to medium-sized enterprises, maybe 2 in 10 succeed, but maybe 1 of the 8 that don't succeed produce a large number of IoT devices, maybe in East Asia, and sell them and they're reasonably successful, and then go out of business. Those devices might be in use, but actually totally unsupported, completely vulnerable to hacking. It's very hard to think of a way around that particular type of scenario.
Questions? Here.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned 5 challenge streams that Petrus was working on, right? Privacy, trust for everyone, and security, and was another. Now adoption was left alone. I'm wondering, is there any link between the first 2 and adoption? Because I do see a lot of research that's coming up that's monitoring factors of adoption and trust, privacy, and security.
No, you're absolutely right. So the prerequisites for adoption are in many ways those trust and security, but actually there's also personal and corporate behaviours for the adoption of new technology. So if you like, it's a subset, the trust of the total adoption picture, and the degree of credibility that's necessary or need to adopt, if you like, before you go with that. So we're trying to cover the broader spectrum and not just the security side of adoption.
Are there any standards for the management of IoT devices in residential, commercial, industrial environments for the enrollment and sharing of the data from those devices? And I'll tell you why. I bought a second-hand Honeywell Wi-Fi thermostat, and I went through all of the directions and logged on, and I was requested to enroll it with Honeywell. I found out, of course, that somebody else had enrolled it before me because it was used, and they had not unenrolled it. So that's one challenge to start with. The second challenge is once I enroll it, then it seems that everything I want to do to my thermostat, raise the temperature or put on the air conditioning, is going to be known to Honeywell.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily like that. Are there rules, standards, and guidelines emerging?
So I wouldn't want to be definitive on that. Certainly standards are in formation, and certainly protocols like HyperCat, for example, are being developed in the UK. I'm sure across the world there are other standards emerging, and I guess the best one, or the most widely adopted, will win. I'm not aware of those deeper questions of ownership and change of ownership coming up in any standards. The standards I'm aware of will be more at the sort of physical stack level, if you like, of the device. But it's a very, very good point, I think.
Well, it's the business issue. Let's say it was a heart rate monitoring machine or a sleep apnea device, something more interesting.
It's relatively anarchistic, I think, the way people are managing that.
Okay.
As with interoperability, it's relatively
Anarchistic
as well. But I think with your point about sharing data is absolutely salient, I think, because obviously Google with Nest and so on and other manufacturers are really interested in usage data. There's real value in that, in the fusion of that. Maybe anonymized, of course, but actually just the statistical spread of how people are using energy, for example, is very nice.
George?
I guess another question regarding the usage and the storing of and sharing of data. When you have, I guess, as soon as you consider how deep the Facebook machine reaches into our daily lives of everything, even if you don't use Facebook, you are attracted by Facebook.
Yes.
Same goes for Google. So if you're dealing with a machine like a pacemaker, or if you're on an insulin machine that is now IoT, or somehow connected to the internet where these big analytics services get a hold of that, but then they can sell your data to your insurance company, and then they can raise your rates because you have a pre-existing condition, where in Canada we're kind of protected against that, but there are other parts in the world which are not. How would you, do you see that this is a possibility of they're going fully zero knowledge of it, or because I know this analytics system will not stop, because Facebook has no product to sell. When a company does not sell a product, you are the product. Same goes for Google. Your Gmail, does it cost anything for you? You're the product of Google. Or you're the product of Google.
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, there's the issue of data protection and anonymity and what legal requirement there is to maintain that, which I guess would be the overriding thing within any jurisdiction. And I couldn't speak for different countries around the world, but certainly I do know from working consulting with the insurance industry, for want of a better term, or sector, that the inferences that can be gained from a multi-source of data streams about an individual are chillingly accurate in terms of time and activity. So in terms of people, for example, in your life, going from being a student at school to university to owning your first car to getting married, all that sort of stuff, they can time that to within kind of 3 to 6 months by just knowing basically where you are in your behavioural activity. And if you could couple that then with real-time IoT data, occupancy, presence in locations with your mobile device data, it's almost complete knowledge of the individual, potentially, but obviously modulated, controlled hopefully by jurisdiction that requires anonymisation of that data.
Okay, Daniel?
So I have 2 points. So I'm really glad to hear you talk about the socio-technical aspect, multidisciplinary. We're really heading towards a transdisciplinary factor at some point in the future, which really raises one question about the underlying science. So the science of cybersecurity, cybersecurity. There was an effort, which I think is being reviewed somewhere in the US, on working hard on that. There are 4, 5, 6 labs. It's like Angela Sass
Yes.
at Imperial.
No, she's a colleague at UCL.
Sorry,
Angela's,
UCL,
yes,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if she's involved in this or
Yeah.
if the